Yeah, I don't know if I can move this thing away, but
Yeah,
that's fine. I think it's fine. All right. Okay. Hello. Thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to this talk. I don't know what I imagined would happen. We'll see. So I'm like a mathematician. I'm kind of old to type theory, but new to formalization, and in particular lean, but it's very, very new to me. So this is a kind of a talk about formalization in a kind of philosophical sense, but less so in a technical sense. And the idea is to kind of understand, okay, if you want to formalize something, so this high category, this word there, which is kind of like very scary and difficult. And yeah, we will try kind of different things, different proof systems, different ideas, and see what works. And so like, we want to see how far lean can get us, maybe. Okay, so the overview of the talk is basically what I just said. So there's this thing called high category theory. It's out there in math. It's really hard. People make mistakes. People don't understand what they're saying. So ideally, you want to formalize it. And if there was a math talk, I would spend a lot of time trying to convince them, but you are already formalizers, so I don't have to say anything. Just believe me. And the problem is, how can you do it? And there's like different efforts. I want to kind of discuss two or three of them. Let's see how this goes. So I don't exactly know what kind of background would make sense. So let me tell you a little bit about what a category is. I hope there's some of you who know, and maybe there's some of you who have heard of the term, but might not know. So this might be some helpful review. So the idea of a category is like in math, in computer science, in the world, there's like stuff. So, and this stuff sometimes interacts, right? So sets interact via functions, groups via homomorphisms, topological spaces via continuous maps, types via also like there's functions between types and so on. And whenever this is the case, we can assemble them into what we call a category. So a category has like objects and morphisms, and a morphism composed in like a reasonably nice way. And so there's all these examples that are listed there. The problem is that not everything is a category, in the sense that not always compositions is the way we want it to be, nice and elegant. If you're a mathematician, the go-to example is like paths in a space. So I can think of the here like this is PQRS. These are like points in X. And I have paths alpha, beta, and gamma, and then I can compose those to like a composition path, or concatenate them, so to speak. And the concatenation it matters in which direction I compose, in which direction I concatenate. It's not associative. If you're a type theory person, then a good way to think about this is I think of PQRS as terms in some type, and I have identities. And okay, in lean, for example, where the two identities are equal, this doesn't matter, but it's not always the case. So there can be type theories where it happens to be the case where like I have more than one identity between two terms. And in particular, there's no particular reason why like these different compositions of alpha, beta, and gamma are equal. So what we want is we want some kind of generalization of category theory where we still have objects, we still have morphisms, we still have composition, but then we do not assume that the composition is like always nicely associative, nicely unital, and so on. Like there's higher structure which keeps track of everything. And that then leads us to some sort of higher category. And so higher categories, again, so we have objects, morphisms, higher morphisms, but now my associativity is something. Like there's some term alpha, for example, or there's some terms lambda and rho, keeping track of things like associativity and unitality. And they themselves have some appropriate coherences that relate them to each other in like an appropriate sense. And that should exactly be used when we study like homotopy theory, when we study topologies up to homotopy, when we study like homotopy type theory, where like it's type theory, but we have these higher identity types. The problem, of course, is how do I make this kind of vague heuristics into a real definition? And we could, yes, there's a question.
Sorry, I don't know whether I would call that still category theory, because like usually when we talk about extensions of category theory, then it's like it is an ordinary category where composition is associative, but it has an additional structure, like these two cells or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly firm on that, but on these things called semi-groupoids or something like that, where you can compose, but only in some occasions, not everything is composable.
I don't know if they're called semi-groupoids. I mean, yeah, I think this is just like standard now to call them higher categories, but it is correct that a higher category does not have an underlying category, so to speak. What you said, this is correct. Whether that is the reasonable thing to do, I don't know, but like societally, that's how it has happened.
Well, there are examples.
Like I mean, that's what they're called. Whether that should have happened, I don't know. But like high categories now is like in a weakly defined composition. Yeah. So one thing I could try is naively sit down and write down a definition. And of course, if I do that, I will die before I finish it. Because for every level, there's always a next level where I have to add further and further relations. And these relations become more and more complicated and intricate. So this will never work. So what people have done is they have like figured out a way to bundle up, like kind of package up all this information in some one gigantic thing, and then like work with that one gigantic gadget all at once. Let me like try to explain one of those ways this is done. And usually this is exactly what you don't do. Like all higher category talks are about not giving the explicit description of this like bundled information. You just say it exists and then you talk about your cool proofs and results. But the whole point is you want to formalize this. So the whole point is like see that how painful this is and like why this is not easy to do this in Lean. And you have to like work really hard. So the thing that we want to look at is the so-called category of simplices. So it's a category. The objects are just non-empty linear ordered sets. So we just have like literally just finitely many elements. So in bracket n, n plus 1 elements. They're linearly ordered. A map between them is just a linear ordered map. There's no other property, nothing special about this. Here are like some examples. So these like deltas are like very specific examples that are kind of nice, where like delta I means I have the map from j to j plus 1 where I skip the ith element. Right. So for example, delta 0 here in the bottom goes from 0 to 1, and I skip 0, so delta of 0 is 1. Delta 1 of 0 is 0 because I skip 1. Exactly. So these are some examples. And now, why do I care about this? It's because now I can turn all the arrows around and look at what I call a simplicial object. Because it's the object that has coming from the simplex data. And so a simplicial object is just a collection of objects, one for each one of these like ordinals, and collection of maps, one for each one of those like delta i's that I have. And so, for example, I can talk about a simplicial set. That would just mean all these xi's are sets, and all these like di's are functions of sets. And the claim is that this is supposed to be a category of sorts, a higher category of sorts in some sense. How does that make any sense? So the idea here would be that my x0 is the set of objects, x1 is the set of morphisms, and if I look between x0 and x1, what do I see? I see exactly 3 maps. I see a d0 and a d1, and I didn't add a notation because it would be chaos, but there's an s0 going the other way. And if I think of a category, I have for any morphism, I have a source and target, and for any object, I have an identity. And that's exactly, those 3 maps are exactly supposed to encode source, target, and identity. So this is like the first kind of 4 items. So x0 are my objects, x1 my morphisms. I have source target, I have identity. Now x2 is supposed to be the set of composable morphisms. But this doesn't really work exactly the way I want. But because now if I start with some pair of composable morphisms in a literal sense, like fg in x1 times x1, so it's composable, that d0f is d1g, then I should be able to extract some kind of composition. And so going back here from x2 to x1 in this like messy diagram, I have 3 maps. So I have d0, d1, and d2. So d1 is in between d0 and d2. And so 2 of those should just project, like if I should think of this data as dependent on x1. So I have 2 projections, which just tell me which of the 2 legs I have. And this third one, d1, should be the composition. And so that's kind of what I tried to like write down here. So from x2, I have d0, d2 going to a pair of x1s, and I have d1, which is supposed to be the composition. But it goes the wrong way. So what should happen is I should have some sort of section. I should have some ability to go back. Yes?
So the elements of these ordered sets, are they playing the roles of indices? So saying like, well, this is source, target, or keeping track of the the morphisms in the associativity equations and things like that, or what are?
Yeah, metaphorically, not literally, right? Because they're just like I map n to xn. So xn should be thought of as kind of n composable arrows, which is like kind of what this last item is, but not like literally, right? Because literally I just have a functor. I'm just assigning to n something.
Yeah, but whenever you have functors from finite sets to some category, then you're basically selecting objects.
Yes, for every finite set, exactly. Yes. So this is not enough. This definition of like just having these sets and all these like maps in between is not enough, but I need even more. Yes. Well, I mean, I want to have a composition, but I need to have the ability that if you give me two morphisms and I tell you the source of the second is the target of the first, then I get a composition. And if I look, I have a zigzag. So from this set x2, I have a projection map to these set of composable morphisms, and I have d1 going the other way. I want a map from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. So what I need is a section of the first one that I post-compose with the second one, and that gives me the composition. But the section doesn't exist in the definition. So the point then is like my first kind of like naive try to actually make this into a definition is define what we call a quasi-category. A quasi-category is a simplicial set. So I have all this data, all these sets, all these morphisms in between. And additionally, bunch of these maps have sections. This is like part of the assumption that these sections all exist. And this is just in standard literature, there's an existence, there's no like particular fancy assumption. So it would particularly imply that exactly the section from x2 to this projection exists, and I can define composition. But there are also higher sections which then tell us, for example, that this composition is suitably associative, that the associativities are suitably coherent, and so on. All of this is kind of built into the collection of maps, morphisms, and these like lifting conditions. And there's a similar, like a slightly different version of this, where I, instead of taking sets, I assume all of these sets have a topology on top of that. And then I replace the lifting conditions with something that is, the liftings are simpler, but then the sets are topological spaces. So, and these two are like equivalent ways of characterizing like what a higher category is supposed to be. Okay, very easy. This is first semester bachelor math. Everyone can do this, no problem. So let's see like at least one example. So examples of high categories are not that easy to come by, but let's see exactly one explicit example. So that's what I call delta one. So delta one is a functor from delta of the set, and it has n plus one elements at stage n. So I have two elements, x, y, at level 0. These are my objects. Then I have three elements at level 1, so it's two identities, and one morphism from x to y. And at stage 3, I have four elements, which are exactly all possible ways to form composable arrows in this one category where I have like, well, one morphism and two identities. And then you can continue this. And so you can repeat the same where you replace delta 1 with delta n. And if you like decompose this, delta n will be like this kind of simplicial set where, well, you have n composable morphisms. So there's like n plus 1 identities and n morphisms between them from I to I plus 1. Yes. Yes. Well, it's the free category on the graph with like n plus 1 points and n edges between like two consecutive points. If you take that graph and take the free category, you get like delta n. Yes. Okay. So then what we can do is we can reformulate. Okay. In the last line, then let's take for faith that this delta n really classifies freely n composable morphisms in the free sense, which means a map from delta n to x precisely classifies n composable morphisms in x, which is exactly supposed to be xn, and that happens to be true. So that unwinds to exactly the correct statement. And so what can I then do? I can more precisely characterize a quasi-category as a simplicial set x and the fact that whenever I want to construct a map from delta n into X, I can get it if I have a suitable sub collection of delta n information. So there's a notion of inner Horn, which I will not define, which is a suitable kind of sub information of delta n. Like I have some information of the n composite morphisms, but not all of it. And I can reconstruct a map out of delta n just by having this delta ni. And the one example that we can see explicitly is delta 2, 1 precisely unwinds to the data of two composable morphisms without the choice of composition. So this delta 2, 1 will like lambda 2, 1 will exactly recover the first case I mentioned. Okay, why did I say all of this? So I guess hopefully I convinced you high category is hard, and there's a lot of technicalities and lots of details. And even people who have been doing this for years still make mistakes. And so this is like a classical example of this is this famous homotopy hypothesis example where like Blavatsky proved the theorem with Kapranov, where they proved like this major result in high category theory. And they had a proof, they published it. 7 years later, somebody came up with a counterexample without finding a mistake in the paper. It's a funny fact. So they just had a counterexample, like a result here. This one doesn't satisfy the result. But they didn't know exactly how it contradicts the statement of the paper. Eventually, then a mistake was found, I think, in 2013, so like decades later. And this is like one of the first examples of, I think, people in high category theory realizing that you want to like formalize stuff to have a better handle on things, to kind of avoid these kind of situations. And this is also like one of the like classical birthplaces of like homotopy type theory. So Blavatsky is like later becomes like a big deal in this homotopy type theory world and tries to like do some stuff in that area. Another kind of like nice, interesting fact is, so we actually don't have any control over the coherences that I just mentioned. Like, so we can explicitly list them for like n equals 2 and 3. Starting with 4 and above, we don't actually know. This doesn't mean we cannot prove anything. We can prove stuff using universal properties and just like abstract stuff. But if you want to classify things, we can't really do this. Like, there's sometimes motivation to have more explicit understanding of all these like this data that I mentioned, and we can't really do this. It's just like too much stuff. So the solution, of course, is formalization. Ideally, let's hope. Or maybe one solution of this is to formalize everything and have a computer maybe check the proofs and also give us some information what's happened. Okay. Before I move on, maybe any last questions about high categories? Yes.
So for standard categories in Markov, what they do is they keep objects and morphisms at different levels of universes.
Yes.
Can you do something similar here? I guess it's hard to have infinitely many levels, but you can't have infinitely many universe parameters. Right?
I think in this case, in the case of this high category notion, it would be 2 where you could keep it. I mean, I have to tell you more, but like you could keep it at 2. So there's like some kind of the source target map to like the product of objects. You could say that has a different universe level than which is like, that classifies like the HOMS, which is like, that's the different universe level in Lean, right, in MATLAB. And so you want to keep that maybe different from the set of objects, for example. And so we really need 2. No, in this case, no, not infinity, no. Any other questions? Okay, what do we want? We want to formalize higher categories. And how do we want it? We want it as nice as possible. We want the standard literature should just fit in. It should have easy constructions. It should be like easy to work with. And in particular, we want to have nice equalities which interact well with like equivalences of high categories, which are like very complicated. Turns out we can have all of these. And in some sense, like very broadly speaking, I think there's like roughly speaking 3 approaches to trying to do high category theory in computers. And these are like vague words. So type theory doesn't mean anything here when I wrote for Lean. Just like it's calculus of constructions, I guess. But just I mean type theory without any homotopy assumption. That's what type theory means here. So roughly speaking, we can either try a very kind of synthetic approach where we start with a foundation where like, but the type is a high category itself. And then you start proving stuff about it in this proof assistant. Or you start with like a thing where like your types are like homotopy types. And then, or like almost kind of like topological spaces. And then you would look at these like complete zero space examples. So that's what homotopy type theory is about. Or you take a lean approach, where you like start with types being like more or less like sets, like with classical math. And then you start with like quasi-categories, which are basically like simplicial sets. So these simplicial diagrams inside types, and then you start proving stuff about them. Yes.
Homotopy type theory being formalized in Arta?
Yes. In Coq and yes. Yes.
I was wondering why you have the dash there in the table.
Homotopy type theory as itself is inside proof assistance, but for the higher category stuff, you need simplicial objects inside hot. Like I need to be able to say what is a simplicial type in one of those, either cubical arcta or Coq, unimath, Coq hot, any of those. That's hard. That's really hard because you have all these like coherences that build on top of each other. There are smart people thinking about this. There's some progress. As far as I know, it's not done work yet. The best I think that exists that we can do, and I've been somewhat involved with, is try to do like higher categories, but like finitely cut off. So like bi-categories or double categories. These are like somewhere between categories and infinity. And that can be done, but the actual higher version is kind of like unclear. Then the thing that has worked kind of nicely until now is this thing called Rasekh. It's like a very experimental proof assistant that you probably never heard of. It really is designed specifically for high category theory. A type is a high category, more or less, almost, like up to like a prop. You can prove things there. The benefits are like you can really work naively with high categories in that setting. So particular like compositions in that setting are very unique. There's no like lifts or anything. It's kind of like built to like work very nicely. Like the computer treats high categories very like elementary. The problem is there's little support. It's not a very advanced proof assistant like Lean or Coq or one of these. And also like a lot of proofs in the literature are not written in this type system. So you don't know what to do with it. Like you have to actually translate every proof into the type system first, or like into the language of that type theory and then formalize it if you want. And some of them you can't even because they have like some assumptions that are not built into the system. So maybe what you want to try is Lean then, which would be appropriate for leaning in. And I would have said last year this time, so we're in March of last year, I would have said there was very little formalization of high category theory in Lean. But in the last year, like a lot of progress has been made. And this kind of, to some extent, goes back to this recently started InfiniCosmos project, which was started by Emily Riehl, kind of went back to this like trimester program in Bonn that happened in the Haushof Institute last year. It's trying to like do exactly quasi-category theory in a classical sense, in the way I defined. It has the benefit that there's a lot of like support, there's like matching the literature, and also this project comes with all the bells and whistles of like Lean projects that you might not know all of. Like it has blueprints, there's a website, there's like this nice dependency graph where you can see which results need to be formalized to get which other results and so on. So it's kind of nice. The problem, of course, is that identities are very terribly behaved. Like we cannot really get a handle on equivalences. And so you need to really deal with all these simplicial details that I just saw in these like first half of the talk. So I was trying to give an example how this would look like in actual reality, but turns out it's just like really hard. It's like I've realized I just picked like a very easy example, so to speak, namely just the fact that if I have two categories that are equivalent, and one of them has a terminal object, the other one also has a terminal object. And I hope these words mean something to some of you. But the point is like being a terminal object is just an object that has a universal property. And like, so like if I walk to a category theorist and say, okay, this is true, they will just say it's obvious. And in a proof, they will just write this and not even bother. But if you want to formalize it, you actually have to deal with these details coming back. Now, this formalization is, I just wrote this just for this talk. This is in no way like optimized or ideal. You can probably do it much, much quicker. But in the end, you need to unwind some stuff like being fully faithful or there's some unwinding that has to happen. And you cannot just kind of like do transport, so to speak. You cannot just rewrite along equivalences. Like Lean will not do that. And the equivalences of high categories are just very kind of information heavy objects. That's kind of annoying. Like this is like one of the frustrating things about working with Lean in this setting is that you have to really like prove every single property and every single construction you do. You have to then also prove it's nicely behaved with respect to equivalences if you actually want to then prove results. There's no way to avoid this. So 5 minutes? Cool. Yeah. For another example, how like we suffer in Lean when we try to do stuff is, for example, I want to show that I have a functor category. What does that mean? I want to show I have a kind of category that the objects are functors, the morphisms are natural transformations, and they compose and so on. What we need to prove is a statement like this, for example, that when I have some kind of lift a functor from C times these like lambda and I into D, I can lift it to a whole thing. So in the particular case of lambda 2, 1 and delta 2, to just unwind the saying if I have two natural transformations and the source target agree, they compose. This is like hard. This is like really hard math. Why is this hard? Because I know pointwise that I have compositions, but a priori, I don't know that these choices of compositions are compatible in any sense. Like I have to be able to make a compatible choice of composition that along all of these, like every object C and every morphism in C. So this is like, there's a lot of effort that goes into classical math to prove this. And as far as I know, we cannot yet formalize even this. Like we cannot construct a functor category yet. Whereas, for example, in this REST setting, you really can't do this just by hand because their composition is unique. So this is like the kind of thing where like if you try to do high categories in Lean, you kind of get stuck in like really basic stuff because yeah. So having complained all this time, let's see how every challenge can be an opportunity. So I've been thinking about like how can I think of Lean as a place where like high category can be done well. And the thing that comes up a lot, and we already see this in this example, my proof that I have a natural transformation compose can be basically said that I have this input data, this map, this top map, and I have the output data, the diagonal map, and I want to show that the input data implies the output. Right, so I have some map from, let's say, A to C, where A is some input information, and I have some output B, and I want to show that C lives against A to B. This is a very common situation. So there's lots of proofs in high category theory that can be like unwinded to this statement. And one thing that's really cool about Lean is there's all these like tactics, there's all these lemmas, there's simp, there's aesop, there's all these other stuff. And what this suggests to me is maybe thinking about tactics. So maybe there's like some kind of future where one can reconstruct or make this into like some kind of tactic, which would be roughly something along the lines of I have an input map, I have an input class of morphisms S, and I have a specific map. I want to know, can I obtain this map out of this class of maps S by a certain specific rule? So that there's a technical definition of a saturation. And so I can kind of start with a class of maps and can generate new ones by composition and push out and retract. And ideally, I want to show that I can get F out of these. And if I can do that, then I have a proof. So a first effort of this already exists in cubical acta, as far as I know. But what they do is they take the proof, they then externalize it, and have this Haskell code which does this checking. I think in Lean it might be possible to do this internally directly. It would be like way better. If you had this, you could actually like prove stuff. Like you could imagine like in 5 years from now, if you had this tactic, there will be paper which says, okay, we prove this, and the proof goes, we input this map in Lean, and Lean spits out the correct construction to tell us how this is in the saturation. So we prove this result. Okay, let me wrap things up. So the summary, high category theory is hard. Ideally, formalization will fix this. The current solutions that exist are either somewhat niche or really hard to work with. But there might be hope, and hopefully, like with some improvement in the library and some improvement maybe on the engineering side, this can become like much more user friendly, and then can actually like prove some like cool stuff. All right. Thanks a lot for your time.
We're a little bit over time, but is there one question? We could continue the conversation at lunch. I might suggest that. Thank you very much. This has been really nice in the morning. I hope that you're fired up and ready to go to lunch. Again, the lunch is entirely optional. You can go wherever you wish for the next 90 minutes. We will lock this room, so you can keep your stuff here if you like. But that means if you would like to stay here, I would suggest you go outside. You've seen that there's some spaces around here if you want to do some work. Fine, but if you're here, you'll probably be fine. Right. So go outside. I will lead the way to the lunch place. It's just a few blocks that way. We can take a few minutes to get our coats and whatnot. I'll move over there by the doors. During the lunch, I might suggest thinking about some questions you might have for after lunch. When you come back here, we'll have the proof plan. I've added a couple of ideas to the resume already, but again, just we can talk about anything you like after lunch. See you then. Very much.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said you are going to go and we will be back after like 60 minutes or yeah.
90 minutes. 90.
Okay.
I will show